Welcome to the Lead Quick videos. Now, in this video, we are going to do something very special, because we are in the season of political court cases. We are all aware that as a result of the last presidential election and the issues that surround that election, the opposing parties, opposing candidates have taken, the president-elect to the presidential tribunal. And there is palpable fear amongst Nigerians whether there is any headway, whether there will be justice, as the case may be, depending on which side of the divide that you belong to. I was asked a question some time ago by a friend of mine to say, looking at what has happened in the past, looking at other presidential cases that has transpired in the past, can we say that this current Supreme Court, as it is constituted, will be able to deliver justice for the people? Now, depending on which divide you fall into as well, justice will mean declaring that the current president-elect is duly elected, or declaring that the current president-elect is not duly elected as a result of different facts or issues that we put before the justices of the Supreme Court. And so we are going to take a look at the history of presidential court cases in Nigeria to be able to determine whether the Supreme Court have a history of delivering justice for the people, and to be able to say that yes, as we wait for the court processes to continue and to come to completion, there is hope that there will be calm in the country. Because you will agree with me that depending on which side that the Supreme Court will deliver judgment, if it is not seen to be fair, then there could be problem in Nigeria. And so I want to look at some of these presidential election disputes that have been decided in the court before now. And so we'll be analyzing some of the cases with examples. But first, let me point out to you that the process and timeline with which the cases usually take to be concluded in court is about 8 months. Now, this is for us to prepare you for the long haul, because there have been some assumptions in some quarters that the president-elect should not be sworn in until the court case has been dispensed with. Now, how does that sit before the law? Because we are a people of law. Now, we all know that under the Nigerian law, any candidate who is dissatisfied with the outcome of a presidential election can challenge the results by filing a petition with the Presidential Election Tribunal within 21 days after the declaration of the election result by INEC. Now, based on the Electoral Act 2022 as amended, the tribunal will then hear the case and make a determination based on the evidence presented by the parties and the applicable laws. Now, if the tribunal finds that the election was not conducted in compliance with the Electoral Act, or that the results were affected by irregularities or malpractices, it may nullify the election or order a rerun. And so the quick takeaway here is that as we go into the court, we must be patient, to wait for the time, allocated or provided by the Electoral Act to elapse. And so we have to be patient. Now, in addition to that, there could be either a rerun or a determination that the president-elect is duly elected. And so we need to be prepared for any of these eventualities. It is important to also know that the burden of proof is on the petitioner to prove their cases beyond reasonable doubt before the court. The petitioner must provide credible evidence to support their claims of irregularities or malpractices, and failure to do so may result in the dismissal of the petition. Additionally, the decisions of the Presidential Election Tribunal can be appealed, as of course as we know, directly to the Supreme Court, which serves as a court of final arbiter in the case of presidential elections in Nigeria. And so we want to put this background before we go into the cases, of the past presidential elections in detail. Now, before we go, let us quickly appeal to you that don't forget to share this video, or to like or to comment on this video. Send us questions that you may have, send us your opinion, so that it can help us to be better and to help us to also reach a wider audience. So let us start with the first election in this the first election in the Fourth Republic. Now, that is the election between President Obasanjo versus Falaye. Now, on February 27th, 1999, Nigerians took to the polls to elect a new president that will take over from the Abdulsalam Abubakar administration or government or regime, that is the then military head of state, because then that was the introduction of democracy into Nigeria, as we have said, into the Fourth Republic. Now, that election saw Olusegun Obasanjo, the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party (PDP), contesting against Olufalaye, the candidate who ran on the Alliance for Democracy platform and the All People's Party joint ticket. So there was a joint ticket between the AD and the APP. Now, at the end of the exercise, that is at the end of that election, Obasanjo was declared winner. He was said to have pulled a total of 18,738,154 votes to defeat Olufalaye, who got 11,110,267 votes. Now, in March of that same year, okay, that is after the election in February, in March of that same year, Olufalaye filed a suit at the appeal court challenging the then Ephraim Akpata-led INEC's declaration of Obasanjo as the winner of that election. Now, in his filing, he claimed that the election was marred by fraud and bribery. Now, get it very clear. The election, these are the facts that Olufalaye brought before the court. One, the election was marred by fraud and bribery. And he contended that also that Obasanjo was unfit to rule because he was once convicted for treason while Sani Abacha was Nigeria's military head of state. So, three key issues they brought before the court. Number one was fraud. Number two was bribery. And number three was the qualification of the then candidate Obasanjo. So these were the three key issues that they brought before the court. So how do you prove that the election was marred by, number one, bribery, number two, by fraud, and again, how do you now contest that the candidate after the election was no longer qualified to contest? So these are the cases that the court had in the end. At the end, the court struck out the application of Olufalaye based on technicalities. Now, while addressing a gathering in May 2022, in May after that, very recently, that is after the Supreme Court's judgment, Olufalaye claimed that the election result was, altered while he was asleep at night. He claimed that he did not lose the election, that he won the election, and that the military felt safer in the hands of a fellow military man who is Obasanjo as their successor. Now, this case was like a watershed moment for Nigeria, because that was when democracy was just coming in, and many legal opinions and many legal pundits and opinion leaders saw the judgment more of a diplomatic judgment designed to stabilize the country towards its democratic journey. Okay, so but based on what the court based on the available information we have that the court used to decide, to determine that they are going to throw away the applications of Olufalaye, it was actually based on technicalities. Not that Olufalaye did not actually provide enough evidence to say that the election was marred by fraud and that it was marred by bribery, and that Obasanjo was not also convicted of treason. Okay, these were tight cases that Olufalaye defended before the court. But at the end of the day, they used procedural, reasons, and that is what we call technicalities, to discharge the application of Olufalaye. And so we have a number one instance where the Supreme Court used technicalities to rule on a presidential election. Now let's keep this at the tip of our finger as we go now to the second court case, which was the case between Obasanjo versus Buhari. Now Obasanjo contested under PDP while Buhari contested under the All Nigerian People's Party, and as usual Obasanjo was declared the winner, and the case traveled from the appeal court to the Supreme Court. Now in this case, the petitioner Muhammad Buhari and his party, the All Nigerian People's Party, alleged that the election was marred by irregularities, including ballot stuffing, multiple voting, and falsification of results. So ballot stuffing, multiple voting, and falsification of results. They also claim that the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, did not comply with the electoral laws and guidelines. Now these were the key issues that they brought before the court. Now on December 20th, 2004, and after a protracted legal tussle, the tribunal dismissed the application, the petition Buhari filed, and it went to the Supreme Court as usual. But on July 1st, 2005, the Supreme Court delivered a judgment that validated the tribunal's earlier ruling. Now in that judgment, the Supreme Court held that the petitioner, who is Muhammad Buhari, failed to prove his case beyond reasonable doubt, as they did not provide sufficient evidence of the alleged irregularities. So what were the evidences that the court was expecting Buhari to provide? Falsification of results, malpractices, ballot stuffing. Now in that era, I should say that there were not much of videos, smartphones as we have it today. So possibly they were unable to gather enough videos and photographs that they were able to tender to show issues of ballot stuffing and falsification of results. Okay, now what did the court do? Now the most important thing that we need to understand is that the court noted that the margin of victory for Obasanjo was significant, and that even if some of the votes were invalidated, as a reason of those ballot stuffing and falsification of results, if the court, in the mind of the court, if they decided, okay, let us, in these places that you have listed that there were falsification of results and ballot stuffing, if we decide to cancel or take away those results, the margin the margin of victory for Obasanjo will still not be reduced to the point that Obasanjo cannot be declared winner. So in their mind, they concluded that the election was free and fair, and because the margin of victory was very high, considering the areas that the petitioners presented that there were falsification of results and all that, and therefore they dismissed the petition filed by Muhammad Buhari challenging the victory of Olusegun Obasanjo. Now, that was 2003. Now, fast forward to 2007. Another presidential election was held, and this time around, Buhari contested again against Yaradua. Now, in the case of Buhari versus Yaradua, the petitioners, which is Muhammad Buhari and his party, the Congress for Progressive Change, he has left the All Nigeria People's Party and has moved to the Congress for Progressive Change. They challenged the election of Umaru Musa Yaradua, alleging irregularities and non-compliance with the electoral laws. So, two key issues: irregularities and non-compliance with the electoral laws. Now, it is pertinent to point out at this juncture that after the election, local and international observers claim that the election failed to meet international standards. Now, however, when Buhari and Atiku took the matter to the Supreme Court, Justice Idris Kutigi, after listening to the arguments of the lawyers representing both presidential candidates, he reserved his judgment. Now, what do we mean by that? He did not deliver his judgment after the processes has taken place, after arguments have been made before him as the Chief Justice. Now, with this, Kutigi adjourned the proceeding without setting a specific date for the court's final decision. And so, everybody was waiting. Then in November 2008, the Supreme Court eventually came out from their recess to deliver a judgment upholding the election of Umaru Musa Yar'Adua into office as president. Now, in delivering that judgment, the Supreme Court held that the petitioners, that is Muhammad Buhari and his party, the CPC, failed to prove their case as they did not provide credible evidence of the alleged irregularities. Now, but what about the issue of non-compliance of the laws? By INEC, that was stepped aside, and so the court also noted that the election was conducted in accordance with the electoral laws and guidelines. So you can see that they were able to quash, the two key issues that Muhammad Buhari brought before them. So at that point, the court dismissed the petition filed by Muhammad Buhari. And of course, when you look at some of these judgments critically, and you take the pulse of the people, you discover that in each of these elections there are different reactions. But in this particular case, the question that many watchers were asking at that time was what transpired between the time that the Chief Justice went on a recess, and the time within which he returned to give the judgment. What transpired? Now, to compound those worries at that time, at his inauguration, Umaru Musa Yar'Adua admitted that there were lapses and a whole lot of irregularities in the election. He also promised to address the controversy and subsequently set up an electoral reform committee to investigate the matters raised during the election that brought him to power. So, can we say that justice was also given on technicalities on this matter? Remember, we have had one instance where justice was given on the ground of technicalities. And so, hold that there as we now move to the next case, which was in 2011. Now, in 2011, Buhari contested again against Jonathan, and the case, as usual, traveled from the tribunal to the Supreme Court because INEC declared Jonathan as the winner of that election. Now, in that instance, Buhari challenged INEC's declaration of Jonathan as the winner of that election and presented, he and his party, the Congress for Progressive Change, alleged that the election was marred by irregularities again, including ballot stuffing, underage voting, and non-compliance with the electoral laws. Non-compliance with the electoral laws, underage voting, and irregularities. Now, in an unanimous decision, the Supreme Court, led by Justice Olufimilayo Adekeye, held that Buhari failed to prove his allegation that INEC did not conduct the election according to the provisions of the law. The Supreme Court held that the petitioners failed to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt, as they did not provide sufficient evidence of the alleged irregularities. Again, a matter of presenting evidence. Now, the court also noted that the election was conducted in accordance with the electoral laws and guidelines. So consequently, the court dismissed the appeal and affirmed earlier decision by the tribunal, which upheld the victory of President Goodluck Jonathan. So in this case as well, the court, in their own wisdom, decided that enough evidence was not presented by the petitioners. Again, in 2019, we had another presidential election, and of course, there was a petition to the tribunal, and again, the same petition traveled from the tribunal to the Supreme Court. In this case, it was between Atiku of the People's Democratic Party, challenging the victory of President Muhammadu Buhari of the All Progressive Congress. Now, in that petition, Atiku alleged that the election was marred by irregularities, including overvoting, non-compliance with electoral laws, and the use of electronic devices. However, the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal held that the petitioners failed to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt, as they did not provide sufficient evidence of the alleged irregularities. The tribunal also noted that the election was conducted in accordance with electoral laws and guidelines, and that INEC did not use electronic voting devices as alleged by Atiku Abubakar. In August 2019, the tribunal rejected Atiku's bid to upturn the election outcome and upheld Buhari's victory as president. The tribunal also held that Atiku failed to prove his allegations of electoral fraud sufficiently. Atiku's appeal was again dismissed by the Supreme Court in October 2019 for a lack of merit. Now, in all of this, there are some important facts that must be noted. Okay, now, one of those things is that we must understand that it will take a period of 8 months for presidential election petition to be concluded in the courts. This is because the Electoral Act provides for the tribunal to expend not more than 180 days, that is 6 months, to dispense of its case, while the appeal of such case to the Supreme Court should not also exceed more than 2 months. So plus or minus, you have the whole process taking about 8 months. Now, the second thing that we must point out is that there are a series of technical grounds upon which the court can hide to deny petitioners justice. Therefore, as provided by law, the onus is on the claimant to prove his case beyond reasonable doubts. However, a quick analysis of the above mentioned cases show that the Supreme Court has used technical grounds to determine cases on 2 separate instances, 2 cases, while more legal applications of the law has been used in other 3 cases. That is, out of 5 cases, we have 3 cases over 2 cases that were determined by applying legal jurisdictions. Now, in all this, like I mentioned earlier on, there are divergent public opinion on the judgments delivered by the judges in these cases. These opinions varies. Now, in some cases, the judgments were widely accepted and seen as fair and just by the people, while in other cases, they were criticized and seen as biased or politically motivated. For example, the 2003 presidential election petition judgment was widely accepted by the public as it was seen as fair and just. There were no major protests or demonstrations against the judgment. Note that no major protest or demonstration in the 2003 election petition that was delivered by the Supreme Court. In 2007, presidential election petition judgment was criticized by some members of the opposition and civil society groups who alleged that the judges were biased in favor of the ruling party. However, there were no major protests or demonstration against the judgment as well. However, in 2011, presidential election petition, the judgment was widely accepted by the public. It was seen as fair and just. There were no major protests or demonstrations against the judgment as well. But in 2019, the presidential election petition judgment was criticized by some members of the opposition and civil society groups who alleged that the judges were biased in favor of the ruling party. There were also protests and demonstrations in some parts of the country, with some calling for the annulment of the election results. Now, overall, the public opinion of these cases was influenced by various factors, such as the credibility of the evidence presented, the conduct of the election, and the political climate at that time. But one quick thing that we must observe here is that if you look at the analysis we have given, out of these 5 cases, 2 were given on technical grounds. 2 judgments were delivered on technical grounds, while 3 judgments, in our own opinion and based on our research, were delivered by accurate application of the legal provisions of the law. And we have also seen that based on public opinion, 2 of those judgments were protested against heavily. 2 were protested against, and those 2 were those judgments that were given majorly on technical grounds, on technicalities. And so, as Peter Obi and Tinubu and Atiku slug it out in court, let us pay attention to the proofs that will be submitted by these parties, if it will be sufficient enough to give judgment in their favor. And of course, for you as a member of the society, you must continue to also behave in one way or the other that will ensure that the justices deliver judgment on pure legal grounds. Join us again in the next edition, where we will analyze those proofs if they will actually meet certain legal requirements. Don't forget to share and like us and like this video. Comment, send us your questions, and I'll be willing to respond to you in a very short time. Until then, God bless you.